Good afternoon, and welcome to this month's webinar entitled The Cost of Renewables, Challenges and Solutions for Solar. The economics and costs of renewables are fundamental to the viability of the sector and each individual project. If those cost metrics move in the wrong direction, not only will it impede a project, but it can undermine the investment case for a market. This topic is key at a time when investors are focused on quality, meaning the money is chasing a narrower subset of projects. I myself am back from a investor conference in London where there was a huge amount of interest in Ireland, and some other markets that are probably deemed a bit safer, but others that would have historically been seen to have a bit more scale were definitely being given a different look than they had been the year previous. While the resource to make power is unlimited, the capacity to deliver in a timely fashion is definitely more so. The better the economics, the deeper and wider the viable pool of projects available for investment and delivery in the near term. There's also greater urgency required than ever. We are 1/6 of the way through 2025. The clock is ticking. Due to the way carbon works, a ton abated today is better than one abated in 5 years. There's also some important macroeconomic knock-ons from slow delivery against targets. In 2024, it was calculated that Ireland spent €5 million a day importing fossil fuels just to make electricity. If you think about other forms of energy, such as transport and heating, that number is multiplied. That's €1 a day from every man, woman, and child to be spent on something to be burned. 45 to 60 cents literally going up a chimney. Whatever the country's carbon fine exposure, whether 3 million, 3 billion, 8 billion, or 20 billion, strategically it seems foolhardy to pay those out for minimal benefit on top of fossil payments, carbon payments, when the alternative is a technology where you have certainty on the upfront and ongoing costs. Expediting the transition protects consumers from volatile fossil markets through acting as a hedge. The largely fixed price of renewables means that driving them out of volume should help manage the price of electricity. Every piece of analysis produced by ISEA shows that a substantial increase in solar reduces the electricity costs for consumers. Like all hedges, though, solar is not free. To maximize the value of that hedge to society, the delivery costs need to improve. As an association, the cost of delivering renewables has been a real focus, actually manifesting in our values, in that we emphasize interventions that help reduce costs. It has been relevant as we found that many of the domestic costs are determined by the state through policy and regulatory decisions. The benefit of that structure, though, is that policy can change. While working with the Accelerating Renewable Electricity Task Force on improving the interfaces and efficiencies of state bodies, ISEA continues to be a voice for measures targeting cost reductions. We saw some incremental improvement between Res 3 and Res 4, but we believe there's a need for greater enthusiasm on the state side for managing costs and competitiveness, especially given the wider economic context, not just in the wider solar industry, like module and EPC costing, but across vectors such as interest and exchange rates. Reducing the cost of that transition will offer more value to society and make the change a fairer one. In addition to the societal benefits, it means that business cases are more robust and resilient, able to adapt to changes over the project lifecycle. And things do change. Constraint, curtailment, commercial rates, EPC costs, network charges, connection costs, inflation, and many, many more. Ultimately, we want this to cost less. Today, our illustrious panel will solve all the issues. They will delve into the key drivers behind the cost of renewables, discussing how we can reduce costs, improve grid access, and streamline planning processes to ensure a sustainable and economically viable renewable energy future. Excuse me. By the end of this session, we hope you'll understand the main cost drivers in solar renewables, how policy and regulation is impacting these costs, and how to overcome grid and planning challenges that add financial burden. We have 3 very seasoned and expert panelists, Declan Cullinane from Amarenco. Declan's the managing director and ISEA's chair of our board. A key figure in Ireland's renewable energy sector, Declan has been instrumental in advancing solar energy initiatives nationwide. With a strong background in the industry, he brings expertise in site inspections, business case modelling, financial forecasting, risk management, and strategic planning. His leadership reflects a deep commitment to sustainable energy solutions and shaping Ireland's energy future. Declan's joined by Ciaran Farrell from Natural Power. Ciaran is a chartered environmental engineer with a career spanning over 2 decades, 2 decades in the UK, China, New Zealand, US, the Middle East, and of course, Ireland. He's worked in various engineering consultancies and has experience in project management and technical delivery of the environmental assessments, while leading multidisciplinary teams for a wide range of project types, including marine infrastructure and ports, renewable energy, aquaculture, pharmaceutical, food production, and water treatment. As well as being Director of Consulting for Europe, he's also Natural Power's Country Director for Ireland. And last, but definitely not least, assuming she can get over some of the technical challenges, is Laura Mean from Ørsted. Laura is leading grid strategy for development and M&A projects and identifies opportunities for innovative technologies in their business development and strategic growth team. Prior to joining Ørsted in 2022, Laura contributed to significant research at Mare and spent over a decade with EirGrid. She holds a PhD in engineering and a degree in electrical engineering from University College Cork, and actively participates in industry groups, including serving as the vice chair of our own grid working group. So Declan will lead us out with a presentation, and Ciaran and Laura will join for the panel discussion afterwards. So this is just a quick reminder that if you have any questions, you can input them via the Q&A tab, and I'll put them to our speakers after the session. Okay, over to you, Declan.
Super. Thanks, Colin. Appreciate that. Not sure we're going to fix all of the problems, but we will certainly discuss them and find some ways to resolve them. So let me just get the slideshow working here. Okay, cool. The three of us will, as you say, discuss some points in relation to the full life cycle of a project, through the early development phase through to construction elements of the challenges of grid constraint, curtailment, and other aspects. So we have a good panel to, at least between the three of us, to give different views. My part I'm just going to talk about is the early stage development of the project, looking at the breakdown of cost assumptions you have, and maybe just having an open discussion on some of the challenges from an early phase of decision making. Then a slight comparison of what a 38 kV connected project versus a 110 connected project might look like in terms of the percentage split of capex cost on those, and maybe just some reflections on that, and then into some elements of policy change. So we might just get straight into it. Looking at a project, I guess, I'm assuming here 45 megawatt peak on a, say, a 38 kV connection, and just for ease of numbers, 100 megawatts on a 110 connection. We'll look at that later as we go through. But as a developer mindset, number one elements you're looking at, you're looking at the three fundamentals of any project. You're looking at sufficient resource from a irradiance point of view, grid from a capacity point of view and proximity point of view, because it all has driving factors in terms of cost, both distance wise and of course capacity, and scale of project. Can you get the land element of that? And as we go through the next slides, you'll see maybe the breakdown of percentage spend of on a DevEx situation, at least from a project where the effort involved in the early stage of the project is substantial at different phases. Policy impact, I guess, enablers and delays along the way. ECP consultation as we move to ECP GSS now is a big step in our history. I think that's a huge element which we all recognize as progress. ECP in general coming in post the gate processes is a big step, of course, as well. When we've had that for the last number of years, it's worked. It's a solution that works. It gives investor confidence, and it's a strong thing that we need to continue for the foreseeable, with evolution of that to enable more and more benefits. And Laura and Ciaran will come into elements of that as we go through around maybe some of the challenges of the new GSS process in terms of the design assessments that need to be done to enable detailed both cost and technical analysis of projects, how to connect. Market evolution. The EPC contractor market has evolved immensely, over the last number of years, as we see the volume of megawatts coming on the bars both at domestic level, commercial rooftop level, and at utility scale level, connecting onto the grid. The interest in the Irish market, as you mentioned earlier on, Conal, it's a very strong market. There's a lot of interest from both investors and contractors coming to the market, and it's one that we would welcome, because at the rate of build out we expect for the market, there is not enough support from the EPC contractors. We've seen the likes of Murphy's now come into play with some of the larger projects. Voltalia very active here amongst many others, and the incumbents of, say, Copper Coast or Enerpower for different scales. But there are some large entities coming to the market because they see this market as a market for the future. And I guess the investment climate, as I mentioned in my last point there, from a government basis, strong government commitments, strong focus from governments. We see that through not just our government targets, but also as well trying to manage some of the roadblocks we have from a planning process, a grid process, implementing RED 3 directives through to the planning landscape of national policy, national planning frameworks, but also as well just the planning development bill, pushing that through last year. That all obviously has to come fully into play just yet, but it's all steps along the road to a much speedier process to getting projects consented, getting more surety around how you would connect. That coupled as well, of course, to shaping electricity future from EirGrid and the evolutions of that, to allowing investors to seek where are the most suitable areas for us to invest time and effort from a grid-led strategy. We all know those in the market, that is a very, very challenging aspect to focus in on, to identify capacity and also identify the routes to actually how to connect, the timeline of that, the connection cost on that. They're all very, very much challenges. And as we move towards firm access and more projects, gives, again, investor confidence on those aspects. But again, there's points I might bring in Laura on later on as we go through. One of the key things I wanted to explore is just the early stage development project. What's it look like? You identify a project, how much you're going to spend on it. Various different stage gates within every company will have a view of commitments at various levels after doing planning, screening, grid screening, moving forward to the next phases. But the breakdown, I guess, as you look at it from a cost breakdown, in my very last bullet point there, you see just an estimated cost of, say, 600,000 just to get a project through the planning process. And that includes all of the land negotiation, all the permitting process, getting your project through the ECP batch process, amongst many other aspects of legal costs and others. And you can see that quite a large chunk of time and cost is spent between, say, land negotiating, permitting, almost 50%, or actually just over 50%, 50.4%, which is a huge chunk, because the land element is very time consuming. It's a lot of effort going into that, but it's a key element of the project, of course. The permitting process, that allows for the initial application and some RFIs, and then there's appeals within that as well, in the 4.9% just to the north of it. That is a quite protracted process. It is, after getting much swifter compared to a number of years ago. We look now at the process being, you should have a decision from local authority or refer to the board. Under RED 3, you should have it all within 12 months, or have your planning on grid within 24 months. That we're not there yet, but we're moving swiftly towards that. We're seeing local authorities getting strong support for, or giving strong support for renewables and for solar projects. The focus, I guess, in the market is trying to find the most suitable locations. The element, I guess, which is delaying some of these projects is when it gets referred to the board, it can take substantially longer to get that decision, but we are seeing a speed up in that process as well. So it all is positive elements that's moving the right trajectory to make sure that we're getting projects through the various phases of consent and into the next phase, which is through ECP, get your grid offer, and make your investment case from there. But if you just look at the breakdown, it is fundamentally land permitting, a huge amount of that, the grid process, appeals, a large amount of legal and planning amendments, and say the design elements feed into that, but it's a fraction overall. And this would be, bar the cost, the percentage split would be almost the same, be it for a smaller utility scale project. And when you're focusing on utility scale, say like a 38 connection upwards, say, or 110 connection upwards, there's a substantial amount of investment at this point. For smaller projects, it'd be slightly less, but overall, your percentages on your graph would be very similar. And as you go through, then I guess these two are very, very similar graphs, but it just gives you, I guess, a very unexpected result, which is your project capex. What's the makeup of that, and where you have your grid costs being static for a 110 connection. Whether you're building out 80 megawatts or 150 megawatts, your connection cost is, in terms of capex of building out that station, is almost fixed, and the same on a 38 basis. But the interesting spread is it's still about the quarter. You're 80-20 or you're 75-25 as a cost on that. As I mentioned, my lower points here on the bottom of key observations. Land and planning costs are proportionally larger, lower, I guess, when it's advertised across the larger projects. The grid infrastructure, if you're comparing a 38 kV tail station versus with a short grid connection to a substation, or a 110 kV loop-in, there are massive differences between that cost. And one point actually on that as well in the 110s is that we've seen evolution of designs from EirGrid, and maybe without consultation from industry as well, which is a challenge for us. We're seeing changes in specifications of the Type A and Type B stations, especially between the loop-ins and tails, where additional cost is getting pushed to the developer to consider as part of the project, and I use consider in inverted commas in that sense, because it is just a specification for us to build out. All these add costs to the projects, and then increases the hurdle rate of the project to manage, and ultimately strike price, as it feeds through. EPC costs remain the largest element of that, and then the full build-up of that is obviously all of your roads, infrastructure, cabling, modules and structures, inverters, the whole lot of that for the whole plant facility. It's a huge portion of it, and it's an element that I would say, as a percentage split, would not deviate much. I've only taken a year one view of you and assuming, which is not a fully realistic picture, but let's say you build this on it within 1 year, you have your land costs and other elements. But if you were to look at this with a different model of a 35-year cost and an operational cost, we can move into that. I don't have that data right now to present, but if we look at the land costs over a number of years, you look at your rates on a project over a number of years, you look at your TUOS charges, and the inflationary elements of those, you'll see a different picture between years 1 to 5 and 5 to 15 and 15 to 30 for sure. There's a different spread. As we go through, I guess the key impacts and on the cost of the project and on viability, because the number one thing, I guess, as you were describing, Colin, investors in the Irish market, they want confidence in projects. A lot of interest in this market because it's, as I mentioned earlier, from a government basis, very, very strong outlook, a market that has now proven itself to have a very strong track record of building out assets. There are a lot of large players in this market who are delivering large scale solar projects onto the utility system. We have a grid operator who understands solar and understands the speed at which that can be built out. We have a RES scheme and a very, very healthy corporate PPA market also as well that wants this power. So we're a very evolved market, but at the same time, I think it's almost an element of, I'm not going to say startup, but it's akin to that we're in that phase of growth, and the market needs to attract more the EPC contractors, as I mentioned earlier on, to make sure we can facilitate that growth over the next number of years. If we look at some of the elements that are challenges, our growing demand, I guess that's maybe a point for you, Conal, maybe to come in on after this, as well as just the projections out to 2030, projections to 2050 as our growing demand. Can we keep up with that demand? And looking at electrification of heat, looking at from a domestic and commercial basis, the growth of white goods, EVs, the growth of demand electricity in general, irrespective of any data centers or anything else. That is huge growth over the next number of years. The shaping 2.0, I guess, the infrastructure and investment, that is one of the things we heard from the conference in October last year with Liam Ryan is, very positive outlook of what their investment plan is in the grid infrastructure. However, some of those massive projects are a 10-year plan. We want that to move quicker. We have to have that infrastructure in place in a much faster period of time to allow us to actually to continue to invest in projects from a developer perspective, to see that the roadmap of those projects will actually be formulated and concluded and invested on and actually constructed. There has been many things in the past where there has been promises to invest in that infrastructure where it hasn't been delivered. And I think that the confidence is certainly there now that EirGrid and ESB and will be improving the network as we see it. But I think there's areas that we don't know, the investors still would have a degree of caution on the timelines of that. The planning evolution, national policy frameworks, I mentioned that earlier on, and especially from EU directives as well, RED 3. That's a big push. That's an element across Europe that we're taking on board. To get your planning and grid within 2 years is ambitious from where we've come from, but there is seeds of change already. We're seeing speed of decision making at local level. We're seeing speed of decision making at the board level. Obviously, the board Planola has also changed now as well, changed name, and obviously changed from a point of view of the structure that it'll have for decision making on renewables projects and on solar projects, which is a very positive thing. Elements that I guess have maybe come against that historically, I guess, as I mentioned on, so the slow decision making historically would have had an impact on investor confidence. But I think that's a thing of the past. I think that the only outlook I have now is that it is a challenge. It is taking too long, but it's better than what it was. But are we Germany? No, from the point of view of speed of getting your piece of paper that says you can construct this asset. But there is a path forward. I think it is progressing. Last week we had the large end user consultation paper released by the CRU, which is positive. I think that enables a strong PPA market in the future. I think as of hot off the press as of today, I believe that there's a document release from the CRU, which I haven't seen yet myself, on the sharing of MEC. Again, another positive move forward. And I guess there are some technical issues which when we come to planning risk, project risk in respect of internal cabling, the volume of 33 kV cabling in private roads, sorry, in public roads, private cable in public roads, to enable those projects to be connected. There are some challenges around that at the moment, which the industry is in negotiation with the relevant stakeholders on, between ESB and with government, and from an ISEA basis, of course, Conal as well, from with ARET, and to try and push the government to see sense in what we need to be delivering over the next number of years. I would say, looking at these challenges above, they're going to be key to ensuring that there's a long-term stable market for investment. I would say some of the elements on grid, especially where we're looking at firm access in the future, constrained curtailment, all those elements are issues that have been here for 20, 30 years, but there is, again, seeds of change again of how we're going to challenge and amend some of the I guess the investment decisions we have of some of the challenges around those will evolve with time as the market evolves. The scale of projects will evolve. The cost of developing the projects will also evolve. in both a negative and a positive sense, because I think the PPA market will change to suit. The investor market and the investor appetite will also change. But what's fundamentally constant is the growth of demand. There is nothing more definite than the growth of demand is going to happen in the market. And as we move away from fossil fuels to energy from renewable sources, we have to try and meet that demand. So I think that the key thing is, we know one thing is definite, so it's a passive, how do we get there? And maybe I might finish there, Carl, on that point. But I think there's a good few elements of points of discussion there that I might even just bring in, maybe say even Laura, yourself, maybe just any views or thoughts on the grid elements, I guess I was talking through.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, gotcha.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the new ECP GSS policy decision came out last September. It was very warmly welcomed. A lot of the asks from industry had been met in it, but the proof and the proof of the pudding is going to be in the detail, which hasn't emerged yet. So it gave us certainty in what was happening last year. We had another batch in the same style as the previous batches. It told us what was happening going forward with this new process, where there was going to be more engagement earlier on, which was something that industry had asked. But it put this requirement for having a HLTA, or a high level technical assessment, for renewable projects in advance of entering into a batch. It also has 2 batches per year. Now, when I say batch, I'm using that term loosely, in that it's a closure date. So it's rolling applications, unlike previous years where there was only, a certain window where you could apply. So the problem for this year, I suppose, as I see it, is that we don't know yet how to apply for those HLTAs. Who's going to get priority, whether there's enough resources within the SOs to facilitate them. But leaving that aside, for this year, in principle, it was a really good decision. We got a lot of the asks, but the detail now is what needs to come. And in that decision, it had said that HLTAs would start in Q2 of 2025. So we're a month out and we're still unclear. So I'd love to see some clarity coming on that space. The other key element, and you mentioned this as well, is that this will only work if the other pieces of the puzzle also start improving. So the planning side, so you can now enter for a grid application without having your full planning. You just have to be in planning. But you could end up in a situation where you get a connection offer and you can't sign it if you don't have your planning within the 60 days that you have for accepting that offer. So that's another risk that's kind of being shifted to the developer. But I'm of the view that I suppose the regulator and the SOs will be of the mindset that they're, this isn't trying to penalize developers. This is trying to comply with Reg 3. This is trying to accelerate renewables. And I'm hoping that what will outturn is that developers won't be penalized should situations like that arise. But at the moment, there's no certainty.
Okay. Thanks. Any views from yourself, Ciaran, on that as well?
I think just back to the point made there at the start of your presentation, Declan, around the cost of getting to the point of putting a shovel in the ground. I think about 7% of the overall cost is DevEx, which is all at risk to the developer. So I think what one thing, and we might discuss it later on the call anyway, is it goes right back to site selection and coming up with sites that are really actually viable, not just ones that we kind of would like to develop. So we probably will talk a bit more about during the course of the webinar, but one of the key things we're looking at from a consultant's perspective, working with our developer clients, is being really critical on picking the sites, and being really critical on see how much megawatts you can pack into that site. And whatever you go for, you put your best foot forward from the outset, rather than kind of piecemeal and add on as you go, because that makes things a bit more difficult. But I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit more, but I think our stance at the moment is it goes right back to site selection, it goes right back to EYA of a site and what you can pack into it, and then put your best foot forward rather than kind of having lots of eggs in a very big basket.
Okay. That's definitely fodder for thought. Like in terms of the site selection point, I suppose like it kind of just raised that kind of the fundamentals. Like we've seen both your disciplines taking a fair old chunk out of that cost, the development cost anyway, and the heading forward, I suppose, Laura, on the capex was a very big pink slice of the pie for grid. What I suppose I'll put it both to Ciaran and Laura in turn, like in your disciplinary areas, what are like the things that people can do to kind of help control costs, like at a kind of from a very fundamental level? Like Ciaran's given us a sample of even just picking the right place and thinking about how you make use of it, and trying to optimize across the piece. But do you wanna go first, Laura? Maybe give Ciaran a chance
Yeah,
to come
sure.
back.
So I think sizing the project suitably for the grid that's available, and considering what other projects I suppose are coming along in the same time frame. So you could, if you're open, if your company is open to it, you can look at who else is developing in the area, and then possibly go together to the SO and say, look, we have a combined solution that could connect both projects at a lower cost than if each project went separately. That's one particular option. The sizing piece, and that comes down as well to the sizing of your grid transformer. Whether you're going 38 kV or 110 kV, as Declan pointed out, there can be a significant difference. So if you're a project that is potentially, somewhere between 40 and 50, you might be distribution, or you might be distribution at 38 kV, or you could be transmission at 110 kV. And you can do an assessment of your costs at that point, and it may be more beneficial to over install at 38 kV than to push the boundary and go for the 110 kV. But it really depends. It's project specific. It depends on whether you've further ambitions in the same area. If you've initially a solar farm of say 40 to 45, but you think you might be able to get more land later on, you'd be looking for that higher voltage level to give you the options of expanding out later on. So it's, as Ciaran said, it's very site specific, project specific, but also aspiration from the company's perspective as well.
Yeah, I might come back to it, but yeah, Ciaran.
Yeah, just maybe to build upon the point, and I think like given the audience we have is of 50 people, we're all pretty informed. We know what we want to get out of the site when we pick it, but I think there is an unconscious optimism in what we do, and we think that given all the skills we have around us and all the experience we have, we will get a project through to planning and then onwards to development. But I think we need to be a bit more critical than that and look at it on a portfolio basis and do a really kind of in-depth analysis at the outset and be, okay, what's the 120% chance of success here from a planning perspective? And the theme of this webinar is obviously cost saving. And the best way to save cost on a planning application is to pick a good site and get it right first time. The best way to waste money is to do it over and over again, resurvey, reapply, RFI after RFI. And the other real kind of point that we've seen as well over the last while is that we should try and squeeze as much as we can into a site without completely making it look ridiculous, because a site that might have gone into the planning system maybe 2 years ago and is now coming out the other end or has changed hands, for example, may not be viable in that particular size now from an economics perspective. So we would also just think about it at a 2-year time frame for your planning. Think about a project that's viable now that may not be what's going to look like in the future in terms of yield, and bring that one forward. Because if you look at, remember Declan's kind of pie chart, the savings that can be had probably are the latter end, that the last kind of 25% or so. Because if you put in right site, a really good application, well scoped with the local authority, which obviously relies on a degree of engagement from them as well. You're going to do your right surveys. You're going to get them in correctly at the outset. Ideally, you have a good relationship with your neighbours, so you can manage the degree of interaction and objections from them at later stages. And then you've shortened the time frame. So once you can shorten the time frame for your planning, you get closer and quicker towards your grid, and therefore shovel in the ground. So again, this is all very basic stuff, but I think my takeaway from what we've seen over the last 12, 24 months is there's an optimism there that's maybe a little bit unfounded, and we need to be a bit more critical as an industry on what sites are really viable and invest in those.
So you developers have an optimism bias, is it, Declan? Sorry, Laura, you were trying to come in there.
I was just going to say, and along similar lines, you know, from the grid perspective, the shorter your grid route, the better chance you have of getting connected quickly in terms of the time frame, just even to deliver it. So, you know, making sure that there's a substation nearby that has a spare bay that doesn't need a bus bar extension, you know, all those things as well feed into your grid costs, and having a good economic project.
Yeah. So if I have perfect foreknowledge of the future, what you're saying makes perfect sense to me. So if I know exactly so I know exactly who's going to build, I know how I'm going to get on in planning, and I know exactly what my TSO is going to do, what they're going to say when I go in and start talking to them about this connection site. But let's imagine we live in the world that's not all true.
Well,
Um,
well, with the new HLTA process, there is a chance that you will know what your connection is going to be before you go into planning. So that's one of the, you know, real positives that came out of that ECP GSS process. The problem then arises is that, you know, how long is that HLTA valid for, and whether you'll have enough time to get your planning to coordinate, you know, to have your planning in hand when your offer comes out.
Quinn, just one point there, Conal. I think, I'm not going to say it's not blind optimism, but if you're not optimistic as a developer, you're not in the game for sure. But it's everything that Laura said, it's everything that Ciaran said. However, with a view of, you got to make it work. You got to find a way to make it work. And the timelines of assessment, the timelines of finding the right area of land, the timelines of seeking planning permission, and what your competition is doing in the area as well at the same time, never align. It's always a challenge. There's always grey areas. There's always an element of red flags on certain aspects of that. But as a developer, of course, you have to just take a view and go, we'll figure it out. That leads to some good decisions, some not so good decisions, as Ciaran said as well. You're going back for permits, or you're going back to do more survey work because you've expanded the size of the site. You might have started off as a 38 connection, but the capacity is gone. Now you've got to go to a 110 connection because another developer is creating a node on a line nearby that you might OTT into. And you've got a bigger scale of project. And it's just that constant evolution. I'd say the project is never finalized until you get to FID. In reality, you know, you're still evolving it as you go. But I think it's finding the crux of the project, saying, all right, that's the project as a bare minimum. You can make that work, and then building off that, and then take it where you can go to. Everything else is optimization after that. But I think the attitude you have to have is very much a positive outlook of, you will engage with the SO, you will engage with other developers to try and find a solution, and you will find a PPA of a scale that you need for that project to work, a mid case, base case, and a top case potentially. So it's a quantified optimism, I would say, more than anything else.
No, I agree, Declan. I think I'm definitely a glass half full person as well. I suppose what we're looking at is reducing the risk of the investment for DevEx, and come up with your top three that give you best chance of being consentable. So I think that there's probably a bit more criticality to be done around that. But yeah, I agree with you. There's lots to go at, and there's plenty of optimism out there. But maybe just to sense check a bit more, that give a better chance and less chance of wasting money.
Yeah, agree.
So it's interesting. Like this is very interesting blend of like collaboration. Say if you're looking at potentially shared grid routes, competition for say in terms of planning, in terms of auctions, things like that. And that this is kind of an interesting dynamic is of this kind of push-pull side about it in terms of working with your competitors, trying not to do the same things they're doing, and what's kind of implicit in every like is this idea of this risk and this risk framework. Like every company's one is going to be a little bit different when they're looking at sites. Um, you know, some people are going to take different views, legit and can legitimately arrive at different views in terms of like looking at a site and thinking, look at those top three risks and say, ah, no, I think we can do something with that or not. But
Yeah.
there's clearly red lights, there's clearly green lights, but then there seems to be a healthy amber portion.
Absolutely, and I would say that there's a different business case within that as well. If you're a long-term hold IPP, you have a different view to risk as someone who is maybe a RTB sale investment case. You know, you're looking at a different viewpoint for sure. The stuff in the middle, the amber, is always going to be there. It's just how much of it is there, I guess, the question. But I guess if you look at the market here, it's a relatively small market from the number of investors, the number of developers, the number of IPPs certainly as well. The access to data from a planning permission basis is strong and it's accurate. You know, to get that information to do the analysis. The benefit is, I think there's in my view at least in any case, there's very much a strong collaboration view in the market. You know, it's every developer that I've worked with, in the sense of physically worked with or partnered with to try and find a solution, it's always with a common goal of get their project connected, get our project connected at the least possible cost. And I think that remains across the board. There's no one out there that I think is out to get you as such, as well it is, but it's just a case of trying to find the least cost approach for that, because everyone's sensible. And that's a reflection, I think, on of a mature market that understands investment decisions, understands that this is only in a benefit of all the projects. There's a huge amount in that middle amber section still of, you know, grid costs, operational costs, challenge the scale of project, EPC costs from a point of view of either contractors or module supply. I was reading an article in the last week or so, looking at the tail end of this year into next year, where panel costs will likely to increase. You know, what's that going to look like in 26, 27? All those factors to consider once again as we go forward. So your base cases are constantly evolving. But I would say that the market is certainly one here of collaboration, because it has to be, because there's no way you're going to get your project away without us talking to Laura and trying to figure out a solution on a given project. You know.
And I suppose like what's kind of striking about there's stuff within your control and stuff outside your control, and there's definitely a sense, you know, as I suppose I spoke about in the opening about there's a policy and regulatory element to all of this, whether it's kind of local authority, national planning authority, or the CRU and the system operators. Ciaran and Laura, it might be good to hear your thoughts on kind of some of the changes that you think could really have a material benefit from a cost perspective in both your areas.
Well, good news this morning, Conal. We had the MEC sharing policy consultation come out, which we've been waiting for a number of years. So delighted to see that. I'm a little disappointed that it hasn't gone a little step further. You know, we've been hearing from the SOs for a long time that, you know, the physical space, you know, in terms of spare bays in substations is running out. And yet that consultation that came out this morning hasn't included multiple legal entities, which would have been a real boost in terms of you know, taking the pressure off existing substations, because you'd be able to connect more behind existing connection points. So that was a bit disappointing, but nevertheless, it is a step in the right direction. In terms of the ECP GSS, you know, as I mentioned, there was the earlier engagement. I'd love to see now that the actual detail now on, or even, you know, have more engagement. ISEA has been engaged with EirGrid on it, and ESB were present, ESB Networks, that is, were present at those workshops. But there's been a bit of a lull now for, you know, the guts of 2 months where we haven't heard anything, so still very unclear on what's happening next. So I would love to see further engagement with the regulator on it, and in terms of what's going to happen, and the details for this year. And I'd also be
planning to ask him that question tomorrow, Laura.
Good stuff. I'd also be advocating for, you know, maybe we need to do a stepping stones. Maybe this year we don't get it 100% right, but if we get it, you know, 50% better than the last one, or 75% better, that's a material improvement. And I wouldn't be, you know, delaying any batch closure dates for September this year, on the back of, you know, not having full clarity on some things. I think the majority in the industry would be happy to see some of it implemented with a plan for implementing the rest of it later on. Yeah, MEC sharing had that consultation this morning, but consultation isn't enough. We need to see, you know, decisions. We need to see it being implemented. We need to see the changes in the systems and the processes that make it come to fruition.
Yeah, we're awfully fond sometimes of the interim solution that sort of becomes the enduring solution through lack of delivery of the enduring solution. Ciaran, over to you.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, Conor, like all developers want is consistency. Once you've got consistency and approach around the planning process, you can plan for it. So we'd like to see a bit more consistent and active engagement in pre-planning with local authorities to really step through what they expect, so we can deliver upon it. And then moving on from that, obviously we've got best practice guidance that we produce in ISEA, which have been really useful. If we can move the next step and have planning guidelines around that specific to solar, that would be a really good reference document as well. And we'll be consistently producing something that would go into the local authorities that will be as per a standard set of guidance, which will be really useful. So yeah, I think that if we could get to that point, it means that there's a bit more certainty in the spend, and ultimately a bit more certainty, and it gives the local authorities as well something to lean on to give defendable decisions. So they would be probably the two that we'd look for initially.
The other element that I'll throw in there is connection charging. I do believe that there will be a consultation coming on connection charging, and I think it would be a great opportunity to streamline things, and particularly on pass-through costs. I'd love to see some certainty coming on that, you know, that they're fixed when you sign your connection offer. So you have certainty once you sign your connection offer what the costs that are going to be charged by the SO, what it's going to outturn. Because at the moment there isn't certainty. You sign your connection offer, you still don't know what you're going to be paying when the project is delivered.
Okay, I have a query in here to ask me to stop dodging the demand question that Declan said I was going to talk about. So just a reminder, guys, we're about 10 minutes left. So if you do have any further questions, just fire them in the Q&A tab. Yeah, so just for context, Ireland's electricity demand in 2023 is about 33 terawatt hours. If you look at kind of tomorrow's energy scenarios produced by EirGrid, they're looking at something for 2035 between about 53 terawatt hours and 70 terawatt hours. That's 10 years from now. And for 2050, you're talking 75 terawatt hours to 86 terawatt hours. So in terms of their long-term plan, we're not expecting to incrementally increase electricity demand. We're expecting to multiply it, and even within a decade. So in terms of the context of like the driving requirement for more electricity generation and for more kind of low carbon renewable generation. It's fairly evident, as Declan highlighted. Even the system operator thinks so.
It's huge. It presents an opportunity and a challenge, of course. The challenge: how do you get that much energy moving around in the system? That's through shaping plan, I guess, from a point of view of investment in the infrastructure. The alternative plan and the alternative challenge about that, of course, is looking at the opportunity, I should say, that it brings about is looking at the corporate PPA market and the res opportunities that come to that. There's going to be more res auctions for sure. We have to, and the corporate PPA market will certainly drive demand for that as well. So as an investor, that's a very positive element because demand will be there. How we manage it, that's the amber, I'm going to say, rather than red, I would say.
Well, I suppose an area that cuts across a lot of this is delivery of the larger enabling infrastructure. It's been both kind of a grid and a planning challenge. I mean, we don't really want to. We're not going to use the North-South interconnector as an example of good practice in this space, but like it does highlight yet again kinds of challenges we're seeing for delivery of the good. I think none of us really believe that when we start talking about enabling infrastructure investment, we're not really talking about a little 110 spur off somewhere. We're talking substantial infrastructure covering a pretty big bit of real estate. Any observations on that? Are we seeing the step change towards the ambition that we want in terms of actually doing this? Who wants to jump on that grenade?
I think I'll step in here just on the shaping plan. Demand was strategically located in different parts of the network to, I suppose, reduce the requirement for additional infrastructure build out in those shaping plans. If the plan is to significantly increase demand, we have to be very conscious of where that demand is going to be located. Otherwise, we are driving huge investment in additional infrastructure. But if that demand can be targeted in specific areas, it could actually work really well. But there's, like, I'm looking at it purely from a grid point of view. There has to be a look at it from a planning, from a land point of view. All those factors have to feed in together for a coordinated plan. But from a purely grid perspective, if some of that demand was located in areas where there's already significant amount of renewables, it could work nicely. But if it's more demand in Dublin, it's going to be very challenging.
Okay. Ciaran, any thoughts?
Maybe just on a slightly related matter there, I've spoken with the construction team within Farrell. I think one of the things that we're seeing out there that could be improved on probably is greater cooperation between EirGrid and ESB, and just removing maybe a bit of the reliance on custom and practice that was there back in the day, and standardizing that approach. We think that would really help things on the ground as we get to that kind of pointy end of delivery.
Yeah, we do get reported back to us people delivering projects in different parts of the country, getting very different experiences in terms of how that interface works and what they get back from it all. How about you, Declan, as an investor? Is it all going fast enough for you?
No, not at all. As much as I can keep up with things, at least, probably is. I guess, look, the title of this session is exploring the key drivers behind renewable energy costs. To pick up on a point that Laura's saying there around data centers through to shaping, a big part of shaping is planned is energy hubs, trying to get the best bang for a buck in terms of creating new infrastructure, creating new 220 links between different hubs, potential 400s. So all of this is all of an element of relieving some strain on the grid. And the more you can socialize that across that cost, it costs several projects as opposed to having individual projects with their own plans and a bit more joint up thinking on projects. That is a strategy. That is the overarching want and an ambition from EirGrid, of course, and from the SO. But The timeline of projects doesn't always align that. The location nature of the projects doesn't always align for that. I would hope that the HLTAs actually do enable that a lot more, because they have a lot more visibility then from a planning-led approach of all these projects that are in the system, that they can assess an Ørsted project, an Energia project, and an NTR project is going to be, to name just 3 companies in a total sense, that might be developing a project in the west of Ireland or in the Midlands, and say, actually, do you know what, there's a bit of joined up thinking here from this project, from the timelines of it, and from a connection strategy of it. That's where the cost savings are going to come, because if you're looking to that's the, I know I was showing it as 25% on, say, on 110 kV connection. That's a huge sum just for the grid alone, the rest being for the EPC. But you could reduce that significantly by just a better strategy on specifications of grid. I think that's one of the things that the grid working groups across various different trade bodies have been lobbying for some time, is a bit more of a strategic view by EirGrid on the specification of substations need to get built. It has to build 110 loop-ins and 110 tails at a significant cost, quite in excess of what you might see in mainland Europe. So if we can maybe adopt some of the styles of a different style of a connection facility, you could take cost out. Reflects in the strike price. There's a lot of those elements could improve it. What Laura mentioned earlier on around connection charges, that infers to that as well. So that all these things can improve, but I think just joint up thinking of how to connect assets together. Is that back to that collaboration, cooperation aspect I mentioned earlier on, of just how do we actually get all these projects to connect in a feasible manner? It has to be in relation to working together as a market, but also as well, the SEO coming to us going, okay, you're all in the same area. We'd like to talk to you about trying to find a solution to make it work. I think the HLTAs will drive that, but the process for that with ESB is different to EirGrid, and I guess we don't know exactly what they all look like yet. We don't know the timelines of those, but I would hope that joined up thinking is fundamental to it all.
Yeah, and that extends to not just joint up thinking with all distribution connections or all transmission connections. It has to be between ESB networks and EirGrid as well, in terms of all the offers that are coming their way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where I have huge concern with the potentially different approaches with EirGrid and ESB networks. Is there a danger that we'll miss out on those opportunities of EirGrid saying, actually, this distribution project, I want to make it system operator preferred because I see a need for X, Y, and Z in this part of the network? And if there's different timelines, will we miss that opportunity? And that's something that I am concerned about, if there's different approaches, but we don't know the detail yet, so hard to formulate a firm view on it.
Okay, guys. Well, we're nearly at the end. There's a couple of questions. I'm gonna put one to you, Declan, and then maybe ask everyone for their one key takeaway for the audience. In terms of the quoted grid capex per megawatt, basically this person asking, at 45 megawatt peak at circa 20% is roughly the same as 100 megawatt peak at circa 24%. So in terms of the relative share of the grid capex, as sites keep getting developed in Ireland and get larger, does the per megawatt cost reduce pro rata? So they're imagining it's circa 12% at 200 megawatt peak, or is it not as nice and neat as that?
Well, your grid connection cost is fixed in effect. The capital expenditure in terms of building that substation, building that line, whether you fully utilize it or not, you're paying for it. So that's a challenge, and that comes back to Ciaran's point earlier on, and Laura's as well, of maximizing the asset, maximizing the amount of land you have, and sweating the asset as best you possibly can. If you increase scale, you amortize that cost down a bit more, and your cost per meg comes down proportionally as you go. But if you look at it, a loop-in substation cost as of today versus that same cost for that same specification, say 4 or 5 years ago, is a dramatically different figure. And I guess we're seeing that being built into res strike prices, we're seeing that built into the core PPA market also as well. I don't plan to predict the future, but the same way that I think that cost is going to increase somewhat more over the next number of years, and that then drives a situation of, do you then just put up with the fact of increases in strike price to make that work? If you take all other elements as being static in terms of your cost of financing remains as it is today, and some of your OPEX elements remain as they are today with some inflation, or you just have to increase the scale of projects. Increasing the scale of projects is not just as simple with, that is, or you can't do it on a whim, because it's not as simple as that, because the amount of land you need to increase that. You look at some of the elements of what ISEA fought for on the previous budgets around the capital acquisition tax. There's challenges around that from an inheritance point of view. Some of those elements are just roadblocks to the scale of growth on a project. And physically, just getting the land is not easy either. Sometimes it's in locations that are not feasible. So it's a case of I'm giving a good politician's answer, Colin, but it's a case of just scale a project. Yes, we'll drive it down, but it's not an easy solution. So.
Yeah. Key takeaway then for yourself, Declan? You would like people to take away from this?
I guess I'm looking forward to a bit of bedtime reading. Look at that MEC sharing consultation come out, because that is an enabler. Look at storage on sites, allowing the from a legal basis how we want to work that, but. If you're going to socialize and try and amortize costs and try and reduce the cost on projects, the EPC element is, that's driven by the scale of your project. The grid element is driven by your physical connection strategy. But the more you can do to sweat the asset, I think, is the key thing. So if you can include storage, you manage and arbitrate the assets as you want to, and dispatch that power when you want to, and allowing the asset owner to manage the asset as they wish. I think that's going to be the key thing for the future.
Yeah. Ciaran?
I think my takeaway, Colin, would be that there's been some really good applications gone through the last 24 months or so, and a few that really struggled. So I think there's lots of lessons to be learned that can be really applied to future applications going forward. So let's not make the same mistake twice, I guess.
And Laura?
Well, I think there's a lot of cause for optimism, while policy seems to be moving slower than I'd like. I do hope that it'll start accelerating, and I think that with the RED 3 directives and now the changes in ECP GSS, that there's real opportunity for Ireland Inc. to roll out renewables at pace if we can all work together. And I think that's the key. We've mentioned this a few times during the webinar, that it can't just be the SO doing everything or the regulator doing everything. It has to be industry as a whole putting their best foot forward. That's
a good note on which to end it. Listen, thanks very much. That's a very insightful session. Let's draw out the good key challenges for the project economics. Do please keep an eye on our website, members area, social media and email for information on our next webinar. We'll soon be launching some more information about this year's conference, Solar Ireland 2025. And so there'll be information soon about sponsorship, exhibition, and attendees. If you have ideas for future webinars or want to get involved in our various working groups, please do reach out. The slides from today will soon be accessible. And I'd like to thank Declan for developing the presentation and his ongoing support as the chairperson of the ISEA board. Thanks to Ciaran and Laura for bringing a lot of their painful experience to the discussion. Thank you for some good questions and your continued support. Have a great day, and we'll see you all again in April. Slán.
Super. Thank you.